All right, so I'm going to be talking about Chapter 10, which is Retracing and Resurveying of Sectionalized Lands. So it's kind of how the townships. This chapter deals only with retracing of these type of surveys. And this is what your sectionalized lands looks like. What they did is they would actually set it out 1 mile by 1 mile. So they would set out 80 chains. So 80 times 66 is 5,280 feet. And then it would be a total acreage of 640 acres. So if I said 5280 squared, and then divide that by 43,560 square feet, it's 640 acres. So they did it 80 by 80. And then they may break it down into quarter sections. So the northeast 1/4, which would be a 40 by 40. And so it kind of gets broken down. It could be broken down all the way to 2.5 acres. But we're going to talk about what to do when we're retracing a sectionalized land. Now, one of the questions that I saw on an examination was pretty simple, but I wanted to kind of explain what you would do. This only is with sectionalized land. Yes, you need to be to understand this, because remember, our state examine or our professional survey license, the first exam is a national exam. So we've got to learn all of, all the different types of surveying in the US, not just North Carolina. And then the second exam, the first part of the morning is again a national exam. And then the second part is broken down specific to North Carolina and then erosion control. All right, so let's get started. So the quickest way for me to go over is just have my principles up, and then I will talk about them really quick. And then since I am not at school to have my Sharp Aquas, I do have a Wacom tablet, and I'm going to try to demonstrate on the whiteboard. That'll be the last thing I do, so hopefully it'll go smooth. All right, so starting with the only thing I had the students in is just the first 15 principles. And the reason I did, because after that, like 15A, B, C, that's just telling you what you would do in this if something you have to reset a corner, or it just gives you different scenarios. So starting with principle 1, and I'm picking up in the textbook. It's been nice to have online textbook. Starting on page 286, principle 1, the original surveyor creates the original boundaries as well as the evidence of those boundaries. This subsequent written recorded becomes the footsteps to be followed. So retracement should be considered nothing more than an option of the corners and lines based on the evidence of the original surveyor that was recovered. So that kind of deals with what we're dealing with even in North Carolina. If we're looking for, if it's a recorded map and we're looking for the evidence, we're looking for the corners. We're looking for what the previous surveyor has put down on the ground, and we're trying to follow in its footsteps. Now, if it was like we had, let's say, 640 acres, surveyor, but we still would have, we would probably be within, we might be breaking down one complete 640 acres and breaking them down to smaller units. So then we'd want to make the most precise notes, describe it completely as well. If you make a mistake and you call it an iron point, an iron pipe, and really it was an iron stake, when then they go out there to look for it, that's what they're going to be looking for. They're going to think, what's going on? So That's principle 1. Principle 2 is a federal agency or a private surveyor. The description contained in the patent of the original boundary is the controlling description the retracing surveyor should use to place the original boundaries on the ground. So with that, consider a retracement as merely an investigation survey to determine which original lines and corners can be found and identified. Principle 3 is flipping over. When a retracing or retracing or dividing a section of land created under federal laws, federal rules of surveys must be followed. 1, when the final adjudication of the problem is tried in a federal court, or when a state has accepted or adopted the federal rules, and when the original patents were federal in nature. So what that means is presume that when a land grant, and this maybe came from England, it's superimposed within a township, it is senior to title, maybe also junior to a survey of a different line. So just kind of think about North Carolina to our counties. So North Carolina is the senior. And actually North Carolina is from the English, England. And then just think about, there could be something, United States could be the senior and the states are the junior. So it's just kind of macro, micro type things. Principle, and then it talks about junior, senior rights. So and we'll talk about junior senior rights is who's owned it the longest or who was the original owner. And then let's say if I broke down 640 acres into 40 acres, okay, let's say I own the whole 640 and I'm going to sell off a portion of it. I'm going to sell off 80 acres and I retain the rest. So actually I am the senior to everything, and the one that gets the 40 is the junior, even though he's going to get all the 40, even though he splits that, then he actually would be the junior, the senior to the junior. So it kind of goes like that. In other words, you want to look at how it was acquired and kind of trace your dates back. That's a good way to put it. All right. Principle 4. Let's flip my book. Principle 4 is on page 93. Provided that the superior right is not interfered with a fraud commitment, the boundaries of the public lands, when approved and accepted in patent, are unchangeable, unassignable by individual or by the courts. So the boundary lines actually run and marked on the surveyor, returned by the surveyor generally, shall be established as the proper boundary lines of the sections and subdivisions with which it's intended, meaning it's set in place, no changing. Okay. On your textbook 293. Principle 4, provided that a superior right is not inferred with a fraud commitment, the boundaries of the public lands, when approved, accepted, there's 2 principle 4s if you don't notice that. One's under line marked and surveyed. This is under original corners, are unchangeable and inaccessible. So they just talk about the original corners, saying they cannot, where they can be identified, you cannot change them. Principle 5, original township sections and quarter section corners stand as true corners that are intended to represent regardless of where they are located. This is not true of closing corners. So it says the boundary of public lands where approved and accepted are unchangeable and unassignable to the courts. The monuments set at the time of the original survey are best evidence as to where the original boundaries are established. As such, the monuments must remain unchangeable. Closing corners are an exception to a previous principle. So that's our 6. Plats and all original field notes become a part of the grant or patent where conducting a retracement. The surveyor should consult available and known plats and notes. So land grants, according to an official plat of the survey, the plat becomes as much as part of the deed as if it were written on the deed itself. So principle 7 is closing corners that are not actually located on the line that are closed upon will determine its legal terminus. The true position is the point of intersection of the two lines. So I guess they're saying, like, if it's a deed and you start and come all the way around, you would extend them, kind of like we do a fillet when we're doing our, I'll tell you to fill the line, kind of, that's the same thing. So it's going to be where the two lines intersect. Once a line is run and established, it can be altered at any later date. Number 8, after making allowance for natural changes, a monument to be identified as an original monument should not differ greatly from the field notes. So I guess that would be monuments shouldn't be not very widely from what's record. Markings not inconsistent with the record, and nature of the accessories and evidence should not be greatly in a variance with the recording. So all surveyors should realize monuments set in the corner points are like people. Time affects each one differently in its own. The characters and the dimensions of the monuments and evidence should not be wildly different from the recordings. And then the markings and evidence should not be inconsistent. So we just kind of have to look at that, is look at the original tracements, look what it's meant to cover, look at, if we're looking at something 100 years old, basically in one area, wood posts established in 1799 actually were recovered in 1955. So there are some things, but just think about that. Over time, things change. Principle 9, when it is acceptable of evidence indicating the location of original corner, the corner should be considered obliviated from the evidence. So let's say we're trying to put a corner back in. So we would have to look everywhere. So that's my last thing I do. Very last thing I do is try to reset something. I'll do every necessary thing that I can do to make sure that it's not one direction or another, because I could be like within a, the difference in instruments can put me one way or the other just a little bit. So I will do everything I can to locate that original corner. And then it says, consider all evidence to locate a corner monument. So kind of like the other day when we at Spring Lake campus, we couldn't find 2 of the irons. And I told you that I would put in it in AutoCAD and see if I could figure out where we can get to it. And we were digging right on one of them. The other one, I'm not sure why, but actually I have an app that I can actually have an app on my phone, and it has land records. And a lot of times I'll use it, and then I can tell it to navigate, and I'll navigate, and the property lines are on there, and I can go to it. And now it's only going to work if you've got a pretty good open area, like we were looking for the one that was over by the pond. And I found it while both groups were out there doing their, with the data collectors working on both sides. I just took that app, opened it up, took the metal detector with me and the shovel, and walked right over to that point, and it was really bent very bent. It was almost laying sideways, but I was able to find it. So in other words, I do everything if I can. If I can't find it to begin with, then I go back and I may put some stuff in CAD and then go back out and look again. So that would be some of the same things that you want to incorporate in as good practices. Principle 10, and I'm on page 299. The original may be identified by the evidence as well as testimony of a witness who saw that corner. It is acceptable to the hearsay rule, but the evidence as well as the testimony must be evaluated as having to have met the preponderance of evidence criteria and not beyond a reasonable doubt. Standards that have been established for are not the same with criminal matters. So they do use that. So I don't know if any of y'all were listening that one day when I was talking about they were trying to find the dividing line between two counties in North Carolina, and they had went to a local gas station, like an old service station, and said, yeah, so and so comes up there every day about 11 o'clock. So they hung out there trying to look, trying to establish where a line was. And then the one guy's like, yeah, my girlfriend, she's so and so years old. She was alive back there, and this is where she was told it was. And they found a lot of stuff. So they will do. It's really neat hearing them talk about how they go about determining where the actual boundary between counties, like Cumberland, Harnett, or any other county. That's pretty neat on, they're using hearsay, what witnesses had said. Next one is Principle 11. And Principle 11, in a very limited number of situations, a corner position may be located by common use of the monument and a point. So 11 would be the federal rules of evidence as well as most state rules of evidence, except the fact that the boundaries can be identified by long common uses. Possession, 9 tenths of the law, same thing. Principle 12. So a corner position may be proven from evidence of a found original line, trees, or form natural features found in close proximity to the corner and identified in the notes. So only when all the evidence fails to provide a corner do they then proportion. Or that's talking about proportion. But a lot of times, it was one, I'm going to say it's around Anger, and there was a lot of wetlands and a lot of really thick covered land there, and the surveyor had marked all of his property lines really well. And anytime that the trees were near a monument, he set up 3, he would he ties the knots of the flagging to face the corner. And he did 3, marked the tree, blazed the tree. He did it on anything that was close by. So I was easily able to, because I didn't want to have to cut. They weren't going to be able to clear back there because a lot of this is wetlands from riparian. But I was able to follow into his footsteps. Actually, I had that same app, and I was able to walk in, find those corners easily. Metal detector shovel, check it with the instrument, really good. So kind of following in the evidence and recovering as much as possible. And then it's saying if all else, then the last thing we want to do is only when we don't have any evidence would we want to try to provide a corner, would we do proration. When we're trying to relocate lost corners, Principle 13. Lost corners may be located by proportion or by using a combination of evidence and measurements. Courts preferred an obliviated corner marked on weak evidence to a proportion corner based off measurements alone. So I'll kind of show you, that's what I'm going to show at the end, is how we look at what outside to outside which would be, and then figure out what the dividing line should equal up. Principle 14, the surveyor should strive to utilize all forms of evidence to prove a corner as an obliviated corner, rather than resulting to proportioning the measurement to set a lost corner. In other words, when the availability of surveying equipment and computer programs that were made the measure of the angles and distance relatively easy, many surveyors were lulled into relying on subsequent measurements and calculations to set new corners that may conflict, or on the subsequent measurements and calculations to set new corners. That may conflict with possession lines and may cause boundary disputes. Two corners out there at Spring Lake Camping, 2 irons right there at the same corner. I have no idea why, but they could cause some issues. Luckily, there's no fence encroachment or, and actually Federal owns both, but especially if you're doing these federal sectionalized land. Principle 15, when the surveyor has exhausted all possibilities of locating corners of public lands surveys from available evidence, only then at last resort should they rely on measurement alone. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and skip over. And what does an original survey create? We create original boundaries as well as evidence of the boundaries. 2, when a surveyor does a retracement, what would the protocol be? And the surveyor attempts to recover as much as possible of the original survey evidence of the original lines. 3, what are the 3 different types of surveys and resurveys? Original, retracement, and resurveys. And then that could be dependent surveys and independent. What are senior rights? That's those rights which are older, which came first. It is presumed that when a land grant is superimposed within the township, it is the senior title, but it may be the junior title to a survey of a defining line. And then when you follow in the footsteps, what does that mean? Following the footstep means providing the evidence of the footsteps, which include the physical evidence as well as mythology and how the work was accomplished. Number 6, why is proportion last resort for resection and retracing? Too many times surveyors and others give up too quickly, set a new point for proportion. This at the least may put a cloud on resort and titles. Worse can be titles that are void, since the determination does not fit the basic law requirements of law. Only when all the evidence fails to provide a corner do we want a proportion. So in other words, do you want to set something? All right, let's see if I can show one. I'm at the bottom of page 4. So I do spend a lot of time looking for property corners. A lot of time. I will, and you know, angles and distance, and especially if there's something that's 40 and 50 years old, and you know, I'm digging underneath fences, I'm pulling all around, you name it, I do it. I spend a lot of time. And then if I do find 2 together, I'm not the one that's going to say which one controls. I'm going to, you know, document both on my map. Anything that closely follows, I'm going to document everything I can document on my map. All right, so I'm going to see if I can get the whiteboard up. Yeah. Okay, so this blue one's going to be my point A. Let's see if I can get it to, might not be completely straight. I want to draw a line from here to here. Let's see if you let me. All right, I'm going to try to see if I can draw it in. Let me see if I can share my screen and draw it in my Word. Okay, here's A. That's my Q. This is my B. So A, Q. I know it's not straight. B. When they measured from A to B, one chains. When they actually went out there, they got 81.5 chains. And then we want to figure out what the distance it originally was supposed to be from A to Q was supposed to be 41 chains. And from Q to B was supposed to be 40. So we can set it up as a ratio either way. So I can do 80 to 81.5. 41 to X. And we're looking for, or I could do X to 40. Yeah, I'll flip them backwards. Let me see if I can. I can't write that. Either way, it's going to work out. So if I do 81 to 81.5. Or I could cross multiply 81.5 times 41 and then divide by 81. That gives me 41.25. Oh, that's what they have on them. So we would set this iron at 41.25. And you could set the other up the same way. So I could come up here and say, if I want to go 81 to 81.5 equals 40 to X. So it's going to be proportionate. So I can set it the other way, cross multiply 81.5 times 40 and divide it by 81. It gives me 40.24. So you don't just split the difference, you do it proportion to the what was measured. This is original. This was original. And we want to set this Q. So that's it. I did have something like that on an exam. And this would be how you would do it in sectional lands. There's other methods that you can do it. There's the double proportioned. You can look at, it's going to be hard for me to try to do that on this, but it's on page 306, 307. That would be a more complicated one, but you could see that. and it's just setting it up with 2 equations, is what we would do. Then the other one would be restoring a lost corner established by 3 directions. So there's like a couple examples in the book on that. Again, most of the time you're going to have these examples. I was able to flip right to my book, set up the set it up. I don't know if it was my first or second one, but I was able to flip. It had to have been my second one because I had the survey law book with me. So I was able to flip right to that section, look, and it was sectionalized land, and figure out what it was. So they were more hypothetical, but there was a few math ones that I was able to go right through and say, from A to Q, what should it be? And you could put in 41.25. That is the gist of it. I do want to say one other thing. And they have a good, on page 334, has a good example of the townships, which I did a township one separately for you. And if anybody has questions and they want me to log into Blackboard Monday at the regular time, let me know. Or if they want me to log in Wednesday at the regular time to kind of go over that. Because the very last thing is chapter is 11, which is junior senior rights, and that would be what we would have in private lands. And that just means who's had it the longest. You would trace your evidence back by the deeds, which one had the older deeds, junior, senior. Let's say you have 2 deeds, and the older deed would be the junior, and the one that got cut out after that or the older would be senior, and the other one junior. Now, if it's one subdivision, then they're all done sequentially. So it's a little bit different. So you would look at order of importance. So we'd be looking at that. I kind of went over, I think about a week ago, about what comes first. It was like the intent of the owners. And then the next one would be, if we're trying to find discrepancies, we're going to look at junior, senior, right? And then the written intent of the parcels, like what was their written intent? Then we're going to be looking at control, whether it's natural monuments. It would be natural first, then artificial. So your control points. Then you're going to be looking at, what are the natural monuments, like rivers, creeks, shores. Then you would look at artificial. And there's some good examples in. Get rid of the survey law book. You could flip through that and read up on just chapter 11 and answer any question that they would give at you in the survey law exam. But it just tells you, at last what the very last thing would be, and that's going to be area. So we'd be looking at what the original intent was, either it's written or oral. Then you would be looking at monuments and naturals first, artificial second. Then you'll start looking at bearing and distance, and then it may be bearing only, then distance, and then area would be the last amount, because normally those areas say more or less. So it's just a written order of importance. I know if I would have bought this book even if it's a newer version. If I'm going to set view or exam, you should have this textbook, whether it's this one or a current one. I think they just come out with 8th edition last year. All right. Thanks everyone for 16 weeks. It's flown by quick. I think that's a lot I've covered. I think that if you're going to take the exam, just take a review course to kind of refresh over what I talked about. They're going to make sure that you know everything you need to know, I think, for the exam. And like I said, I had one said he did 100 surveying problems to get himself ready when he took his survey license, and he just got I talked to him last summer, and then now he's licensed this year. I just saw him about a month ago, and he did pass the exam, and so he was having to do his continuing ed. And remember, we have to have 15 hours of continuing ed. The first year that you have your license, you're not required, but after that, it's 15 years. If you're dual license, meaning engineering and surveying, you have to have 30. All right. Y'all have a good holiday break, and